I met Anderson Silva years ago at a gym in Brazil. It was a club called X Gym, which is in a town called Recreio, which is about an hour south of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, where I had gone to practice jiu-jitsu. I'd been invited there to X Gym by Silvio Bering, who was Anderson Silva's jiu-jitsu coach at the time, and who I'd met years earlier at a jiu-jitsu seminar in Winnipeg, Manitoba, which is the worst place in the world, but the people are nice. Anyway, when I got Silvio's email, I was living in Rio, training in jiu-jitsu, so I hopped on a bus and headed down, thinking it couldn't be much different than the training I encountered every day at the jiu-jitsu academies in Rio, where the Brazilians fought me, the gringo, like they had just caught me in bed with their wife. I should mention that for some reason, martial arts clubs in Brazil are always hidden away like they're the temples of a secret society. For example, Brazilian Top Team is inside a walled compound with no street sign and scowling armed guards at the gate. And once you get inside, you need to walk through a small jungle past swimming pools and tennis courts, and then there's a set of unmarked stairs that lead up to a training room with Murillo Bustamante and Toquinho. And you would never know they were in there. Similarly, the Gracie Barra Club in Barra Tijuca is in a huge gym, which also has no sign outside to tell you that GB is in there. To get in, you need to scan your thumbprint at the front desk and then negotiate a maze of glass rooms in which people are doing every type of fitness imaginable. I recall one room was full of women in platform high heel boots and leotards doing dance aerobics with their hair and makeup done like RuPaul. And past all that was a set of unassuming double doors that looked like the exit to the street, but behind them was a set of stairs that led up 6 floors to the training room. That was Gracie Barra. Now, the gym I was visiting in Recreio, X Gym, was in keeping with this idea. It was part of a big strip mall on the beach, which you would never see from the dusty highway that stretches past the place and goes on down the coast in the blazing sun towards even more remote places like Uruguay and Argentina, and then eventually Antarctica. Anyway, figuring I was about to face an epic quest, I left my apartment very early. But through some miracle, I actually arrived at X Gym very early. Perhaps because I was prepared for it not being labeled and there not being a sign, and there wasn't. Anyway, as I sat there, Ronaldo Jacare Souza came in, and he seemed genuinely happy to see me, even though he and I had never met before, and he had no idea who I was. Then, after that, Andre Galvao came in. Now, he and I had met years before in New Jersey at the Abu Dhabi Submission Grappling World Championships. And he'd been very friendly and polite, but that day at X Gym, he didn't see me and he just walked by. That being said, even if we had made eye contact, he probably wouldn't have remembered me because I doubt he woke up that day thinking, I wonder if I'm going to see anyone today that I met one time years ago in New Jersey and is now here at X Gym in Recreio, south of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. Probably he didn't have that thought. Anyway, a few minutes later after that, Silvio Bering came in, and he knew me and I knew him because of the seminar that he'd done in Winnipeg, and he said hello, and he led me through a pair, again, of unmarked doors at the rear of the gym, and this time we went down this hidden staircase that looked like they were leading into a bomb shelter or something. But actually it led to a room with a cage and a boxing ring and 2 matted areas for grappling. And this was X Gym, which I think is also called X Striker. It wasn't long before Anderson Silva showed up, and he began saying hello to everyone. And when Silvio Bering introduced me to him, he said, "Ooh, Americano, Americano, Americano." And he was kind of like encouraging people to join him in this like sing-song thing, making fun of me because he thought I was American. And I said, I'm Canadian, not American. But he wasn't really listening, and he already sort of went on his way. And I recall, I thought that was odd, but a lot of Brazilians don't know the difference between the USA and Canada, the same way you and I might not know the difference between Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. Or maybe we do. Anyway, before training began, everyone lined up for a photo, and I managed to slip in totally out of place among these professional fighters and coaches. I got the impression that this was a special day, and it wasn't very often that this particular group got together. So it's now entirely possible that this photo is framed up on someone's mantelpiece. And when they look at it, they wonder how this beak-nosed gringo somehow found his way into the middle of the picture. Now, I had brought shorts and a mouth guard, and I asked if training with them was a good idea. Silvio said, I could if I wanted, but one of the fighters suggested that I just sit and watch. There was this look of concern in his eyes that suggested I take his advice. And in retrospect, I'm glad that I did. The training session was divided into 3 parts. The first was boxing. For this, fighters stood with their feet inside a space that had been marked on the floor with tape. And from there, they boxed. Taking your front foot out of the marked area was not allowed, so fighters had to stay in the punching range and slip and weave as best they could. Now, Anderson Silva was miles ahead of the others in terms of skill, and clearly enjoyed that fact. When he was paired against guys like Jacare and Galvão, he showboated and strutted in the same way he does against opponents in the octagon. And just like in the UFC, he encouraged them to throw haymakers at him so he could slip their shots and return fire twice as hard. Totally overwhelmed, each guy he was paired with stood wide-eyed, and he basked in their terror. Then it was time for kickboxing, and things went about the same way, except that Silva could now kick as well, and things got worse for everyone. Against one of his sparring partners, he landed a spinning heel kick straight into their temple. It didn't knock them out, but it sent them reeling as they stumbled across the mat. As he had in the boxing portion, Silva walked them down with murderous intent in his eyes, pressing them to throw hard shots at him so it wouldn't look so much like a one-sided beating, even though it was. Watching this, I found myself kind of looking forward to the third part, which was grappling. And I knew that was coming up, and I thought, maybe for this, Silva wasn't going to have such a vast skill discrepancy to exploit for his own amusement. After all, I thought, Andre Galvao and Jacare are world jiu-jitsu champions, while Silva is just a black belt that does mixed martial arts, so maybe we'd see him get submitted and fed a slice of humble pie. Unfortunately, everyone had been run down badly while boxing and kickboxing, and they didn't have much left in their gas tanks by this time for grappling. Another problem was Silva grappling in a way which involved lots of accidental elbows and headbutts and knees, clipping people in ways that didn't seem accidental, and curiously, they were never reciprocated by any of his training partners. With this happening, and as slippery and spastic as he was, Silva wasn't caught in a single submission hold. Instead, once again, people just seemed concerned with winding up in a hospital, which I think is pretty expensive and likely not that good if you're in Brazil. When the training session was over, all the guys lined up and listened as the coaches went on a really long series of speeches. I remember being surprised that professional fighters, including the UFC champion, would stand along the wall like normal students in a class. Aside from Silvio, I had no idea who the coaches were, but the fighters stood and listened as they went on and on and on. What were they saying? I have no idea. My Portuguese back then was awful, and come to think of it, it still is. After the speeches by the coaches, the fighters broke off and practiced together some more. Honestly, I was glad I hadn't trained with Silva, as I'm pretty sure he would have beaten the hell out of me, and had a lot of fun doing it, as he clearly enjoyed intimidating his teammates. This is probably why the other fighter had suggested before class that I just sit and watch. I remember the look in his eyes had foreshadowed the severity of what awaited. But I was still surprised afterwards at how rough Silva had been with his sparring partners. But who's going to tell the UFC champion how to train for fights? Not this guy. Still, after seeing how he conducted himself in training, I began rooting against him. Years later, I was at a pub back home in Canada, watching the UFC with his first fight against Chael Sonnen. I had met Sonnen as well, years before when I'd worked for Bodog, and Sonnen was just starting his mixed martial arts career there. I'd interviewed him a few times, and for a few years, Sonnen was sending me surprisingly thoughtful text messages every year on my birthday. So, it's no surprise that I was cheering for Sonnen as he ground and pounded Silva round after round in their fight. And I thought, well, karma is balancing itself out nicely here. But then, with just moments left in the fight, Anderson Silva caught Chael Sonnen in a triangle choke that turned into an armbar, and that was that. When this happened, some jiu-jitsu guys who were sitting at the table next to me jumped up and began dancing around shouting, "Jiu-jitsu! Jiu-jitsu!" They were pointing and laughing at me because I'd been cheering for Sonnen, the wrestler, instead of their hero, Anderson Silva, the jiu-jitsu guy. Of course, they didn't know who I was or that I was a jiu-jitsu guy myself, or that I'd met both of the fighters in real life, and that in real life, these guys had been kind of the opposite of the roles they took on TV. Maybe if I told them this story, they would have understood why I'd been cheering for Sonnen.